Wind needles his cheeks as the plaza holds its breath, the last syllables of her French hanging like a bright thread in the air. Jacob loosens his jaw without meaning to. The briefing packet in his hand is creased where his fingers crushed it. He had layered contingencies on contingencies for this meeting and watched each one fail in sequence, like a row of carefully cut glass falling onto stone. Airport pickup late. Printed deck wrong. Interpreter hunting for the right word and trapping the wrong one. Airport pickup late. The investors have the look he recognizes from closed rooms and late dinners. The look of men who measure their time in slices of loss and gain. Now their shoulders drift downward, then settle. One laughs once. The quick exhale a sign that the machine is moving again. Jacob trades handshakes and short phrases that feel clean in his mouth for the first time all afternoon. Now their shoulders drift downward. But Jacob keeps his eyes on the woman who rose from the roots of the gnarled tree. She does not ask to be invited closer. But Jacob keeps his eyes on the woman who rose from the roots of the gnarled tree. She turns a little toward the departing investors and completes a final exchange with a precision that would be invisible if it were not so exact. He hears the rhythm of true understanding, that crisp back and forth where meaning lands without wobble. Then the sound of the plaza returns. The interpreter lingers at the edge of the scene, with apology gathering on his face. The interpreter clears his throat beside him and says that he can continue, that it will be fine now. Jacob answers that it is fine and tells the man to take the rest of the afternoon. No heat in it, no punishment either, an elastic hum of shoes and voices, and the occasional bicycle bell ringing too brightly for the hour. The man nods, confused, relieved, unsure. Jacob steps toward the woman because he has learned that distance hides the truth. Up close, he sees the seam where her sleeve has frayed to a fragile ladder of thread. Relieved, Jacob steps toward the woman because he has learned that distance hides the truth. An elastic hum of shoes and voices, and the occasional bicycle bell ringing too brightly for the hour. Each line a thin, pale petal, laces mismatched and stubborn. He sees skin at the knuckles split and healing. He simply does not want the wrong words near the moment that just happened. The lack of apology steadies the scene in a way his confidence did not. "Who are you?" he asks, because there is no other thing to ask that does not sound like a transaction. "Someone who listens," she says. Wind presses it once and lets it go. They are a fact set on the table between them. He feels the small sting inside the honesty of it. The private knowledge that his own skill set includes listening as strategy, more often than listening as act. The words are not a performance or a parable. He does not want to talk himself out of seeing what you corrected. He says, the difference between destruction and disruption. He swallows the reflex to explain, how did you see it so fast? Not a spark, not a jolt, just the smooth fit of a thing where it belongs. Words run systems, she says. Use the wrong one, and the system believes you meant the wrong thing. He almost replies in defense, almost says that the intent was clear, that everyone understood what he wanted to say, that the content of the pitch carried the point across the translation. The counter-argument steps up and then falls apart. He has been in enough rooms to know that language is a set of doors, and the wrong word locks them from the inside. "Thank you," he says, and his voice sounds smaller to his own ears. Not weak, only honest. She lowers herself to the base of the tree, with a slow care that makes him aware of the concrete in his knees. Her joint register a quiet dix. She pulls the plastic bag closer and uses her forearm to shade her eyes. Not sleeping, only unwilling to be looked at for the purpose of someone else's story. The plaza folds back around her as if she were a shadow, that had briefly stepped into light and returned to its mark. He holds the remains of the briefing packet and lets the paper remember it has been bent. He tries on the easy smile he uses when deals land and finds it does not fit. As if the muscles have lost interest in the trick, the investors cross toward the curb where a driver waits with a placard. A child stumbles near the fountain's ledge and rights herself with a squeak of rubber against stone. Somewhere a vendor shakes a tray and the smell of sugar and heat moves through the wind. The city resumes its natural state of nearly missing everything. He should be walking toward the car door, already opening at the curb. He should be answering messages lined up in small red circles on his screen. He should be giving his assistant a precise debrief and a list of 4 follow-ups. Instead, he is standing 10 paces from a tree and a woman who has declined his gratitude twice and made his argument better than he did without claiming it. He hears the word pride in a voice not his own and puts it down immediately. This is not about pride. It feels worse and better than pride. He hears the word pride in a voice not his own and puts it down immediately. Where did you learn French like that? This is not about pride. He asks, careful not to let eagerness smear the question. She says, it is survival. I learned because I had to, just like you did today. The sentence finds the soft part of him and stays there. He opens his mouth to say that he did not have to be saved, that the team, that the plan, that the circumstances, but all the tidy defenses look transparent from here. He remembers his tone when he snapped at the interpreter. He sees it from the outside and does not enjoy the view. He says thank you again, because it is all he has that does not make things worse. She does not answer. The decision to exit the conversation is complete. He takes a breath that tastes of hot metal and sweet nuts, and the smoke of a bus settling at a stop. She does not answer. The door of the black car opens on warm air. The city's sound becomes aquarium soft as the seal closes. His phone vibrates 3 times in clean succession, then once more, persistent, like a small animal at the edge of a door. Legal wants. Language changed in a clause he has not read closely. Persistent. Calendar wants him at a dinner, he said. Yes to last week, and already resents. She does not answer. The door of the black car opens on warm air. A dark river imprisoned in pale stone. Home, the driver asks. Office, Jacob says, and hears the decision land. Then he hears another one approach, uninvited and absolute. No, 2 blocks north. I will walk. The driver flicks his eyes to the mirror without curiosity and eases the car into the stream. Jacob gets out at the corner and lets the outer cold claim him again. He likes the way it sharpens his skin. He turns once and sees a sliver of the plastic bag glint under the tree before a crowd swallows the view. The lobby of the office building is all warm light and forgiving angles. Security gates blink green with the precise cheer of machines that confirm money. He nods at the receptionist and forgets her name even though he knows it. The elevator hums with a music engineered to be almost nothing. He watches ascending numbers and imagines them as a quiet pulse, then bans the metaphor before it flatters him. The lobby of the office building is all warm light and forgiving angles. The driver flicks his eyes to the mirror without curiosity and eases the car into the stream. He stands very still and lets the flawless edges fail to steady him. The conference table holds a stack of duplicate decks that feel suddenly like theater props. Beyond the glass, people move in diagonals. They have practiced for years, heads bent in the angle of purpose. He closes his eyes and the tree returns. The resin river between stones, the small sound her knee made. He opens his eyes, and it is still there behind everything, stubborn as a splinter. His assistant appears in the doorway with a folder and a face, prepared to manage any version of his mood. Everything ready for the call. She asks, "Ready," he says. "Do you want me to push the dinner?" She asks. "Leave it," he says, and even he does not know which it means. She reads the air and nods once, and disappears. Her competence. A smooth door swinging on oiled hinges. He slides the crushed packet into a drawer and closes it with care, as if gentleness can uncrease paper. In the window he sees the city looking back. And the man that belongs in rooms like this, he also sees the man who stood in cold air and learned his argument from someone the city refuses to see. He does not know what to do with that man yet. He only knows he feels more awake in the moments that do not flatter him. The phone vibrates again and again, and he lets it. The light on the desk warms his hand. He lifts his coat and drapes it over his arm without putting it on, as if dressing would be a decision in the wrong direction. He walks to the elevator and watches his reflection arrive in the doors, and then split in two as they open. He steps inside and does not press a floor for a breath so long the sensor worries about him and closes, then opens, then waits. He presses the lobby and feels the smallest lift of gravity in his stomach as the car descends. On the street, the air is colder and sharper. He turns north without telling himself why. Traffic hisses by in one long thread. Behind him, the building he runs glows like a glass lantern. Ahead, the plaza is the color of steel, and the tree is a darker cut in the metal. He walks toward the gnarled roots, and the bench still holding a crease where a body rested. Ahead, he walks because something in him has shifted 3 inches, and the new line does not let him stand still. He walks toward the gnarled roots, and the bench still holding a crease where a body rested. Though he told himself it was only to clear his head, the light was gentler than yesterday, thin ribbons sliding across the stone. He carried 2 cups of tea. He walks because not walking would lock the wrong word in place. The steam cut through the late air, bright with mint. Finding the tea had taken longer than he expected. He had walked 2 blocks past the familiar glass cafes until he saw a hand-painted sign, mint leaf tea. The light was gentler than yesterday. He had learned their names, Nia and Celeste, and said them back until the rhythm felt right. It was such a small act of listening, owned by 2 women who spoke to him as if time were not a limited resource. Now he carried their tea as though it were an offering that might not be accepted. Amara was in the same place, sitting beneath the tree whose roots had cracked the plaza stones. The same layered coat, the same stillness that felt less like poverty and more like composure, but it required the kind of patience he used to delegate. From a distance he thought she was reading, but as he came closer, he saw her pencil moving along the margin, pressing neat marks into the page. In her hands was the same book without a cover. He could not read the handwriting, but he noticed the patterns, numbers beside words, underlines that connected fragments like bridges. It was the concentration of a person writing formulas or codes rather than thoughts. He lifted the cup. "Mint," he said. "Nah sugar," from a place called Mint Leaf 2 streets over. Her eyes flicked from the cup to his face, searching for the joke. When she found none, she took it carefully. The heat shimmered between their hands. She nodded once. "You came back," she said. He did not hide the truth. "I wanted to bring tea," he said, and to listen better. She studied him the way a mathematician checks an equation. He waited until she looked up, the steam rising in front of her mouth. For a while they said nothing. The plaza moved around them, feet and wheels, and the occasional distant horn. The air smelled of exhaust, mint, and stone dust. The plaza moved around them. She studied him the way a mathematician checks an equation. "Mariama ba," she said. letters written between two women. It teaches you what silence costs. He asked if he could hear a line. She turned a few pages until her pencil stopped on a mark and read softly. The worst kind of loneliness is being surrounded by people who do not see you. The sentence stayed in the air longer than sound should. He felt it slide between them and touch something inside him that had not been named in years. He thought of boardrooms where faces smiled but never looked. He thought of the meeting she had saved, where no one had seen her either. He tried to say something and found the words refused to form. For once, he accepted the silence and let it do the talking. "It is beautiful," he said finally. She closed the book on that sentence as if protecting it. "Beautiful is the wrong word," she said. "Necessary would be better." He wanted to ask what she meant, but sensed she had already answered. He looked at the book again, at the margin notes, and saw that some were written in a structure he recognized from technical drafts: headings, arrows, abbreviations, small symbols that looked like code syntax. It did not match the softness of a novel. It looked like the skeleton of a manual. He asked, "You said you worked with words. What kind of work was that?" She smiled faintly, not proud, not ashamed. "Systems work," she said. "Documentation, guidelines." She tapped the closed book with one finger. "The way words behave in logic." She tapped the closed book with one finger. "And sometimes the way they fail when humans use them instead." "I help design how people talk to machines and how machines talk back. The world of Everon was built on documentation. I help design how people talk to machines and how machines talk back. Algorithms, standards. And sometimes the way they fail when humans use them instead." The sunlight drained off the benches until only the tops of the glass towers still glowed. But he could not yet see why it mattered. He did not know that the investor's favorite phrase in the presentation, the one she had corrected, the foundation of everything he sold, was language arranged in perfect logic. The audience knew it. She knew it. Only he did not. He changed the subject. "You read like someone preparing for an exam," he said. She said, "You talk like someone grading one." He laughed quietly and accepted the point. Around them, the plaza began to cool. The sunlight drained off the benches until only the tops of the glass towers still glowed. He said, "Yesterday I thought you were angry. Today I think you are simply done explaining." She turned to him. "That is almost the same thing," she said. Then, softer, "I am not angry at you. I am angry at systems that make people like you believe you are the center of everything, even when you are trying to do good. It exhausts all of us." He looked down at his hands and realized he was twisting the cardboard sleeve of his cup, shredding it into thin curls. The motion felt juvenile. He forced his hands still. He wanted to defend himself, to tell her he was not like the others, that he had built programs to include more voices, that he was trying, but the defense sounded small even in his head. He chose to keep it silent. The wind picked up. The last of the steam left their cups. Amara reached for her bag and pulled out a second pencil. One sharpened to a careful point. "That is almost the same thing." That he was trying. Amara reached for her bag and pulled out a second pencil. They had the pattern of indexing, a sequence of letters and digits that looked like internal references, the kind engineers use to cross-link documents. He saw the letters ERV and a number string. He knew that prefix, Everon reference version. He felt a small crack open under his thoughts. He was looking at his own company's internal code system written in the margin of a paperback. He did not speak. He was not yet ready to understand. He was looking at his own company's internal code system written in the margin of a paperback. He saw the letters ERV and a number string. "Are you still doing that work?" She smiled without looking up. "I was erased from that work," she said. "But redundancy is only another name for structure that works too well to be visible." I was erased from that work. He did not speak. He almost asked who they were. He almost said the name Everon, but bit it back, as if saying it might make her vanish. He let the conversation settle into quiet. Her pencil made small scratches. Each one sounded like a leak opening somewhere inside his certainty. He asked instead, "Do you ever miss it?" She stopped writing and looked at him. "Missing is for things that could come back," she said. "I build forward now, sometimes on paper, sometimes in other people's heads." He nodded. The phrase "other people's heads" stayed with him. He wondered if she was building something in his now. A vendor's cart clanged across the plaza. A child shouted. The hour folded toward dusk. He realized the tea had gone cold but kept holding it. It felt like a discipline, the willingness to stay in discomfort a little longer. "You said yesterday that I had to be saved," he said. "Was that meant as a lesson?" "It was an observation," she said. "The lesson depends on what you do next." "What should I do next?" She looked at him, unblinking. "Listen until it hurts. Then act before it stops hurting." He wanted to ask what that meant, but she had already returned to her book. He watched her read for a while. The pages caught the low light, the pencil marks shimmering faintly, like threads of graphite glass. He stood. "I will bring tea again," he said. She did not look up. "Bring what you learn instead." He smiled, unsure whether she would notice, and placed the second cup on the far edge of the bench, a small ritual in the making. The mint still clung to the air, sharp and clean. He left it there and walked toward the street where the cold would start again. Halfway across the plaza, he turned back. She was writing again, pencil moving in a rhythm that looked like music without sound. The page caught a gust of wind and lifted slightly. He saw for an instant another code in the margin, ERVST, the prefix for Everon Standards. Then the page fell flat, and the letters disappeared under her hand. He walked on, heart beat fast, mind restless. The city swallowed him, but the echo of those letters stayed. He did not know what they meant yet. He only knew he would come back to ask. The mint taste stayed on his tongue long after the air went cold. By the time he reached his office, the night lights had switched on automatically, but the echo of those letters stayed, calm and obedient. He looked at it and did not believe it. When the doors opened, he stayed where he was. The page caught a gust of wind and lifted slightly. His reflection waited for him in the elevator doors. His reflection waited for him in the elevator doors. His reflection waited for him in the elevator doors. Calm and obedient. The mint taste stayed on his tongue long after the air went cold. He looked at it and did not believe it. He thought of the bench. He thought of the sentence about loneliness and being unseen. It felt less like literature now and more like evidence. He touched the wall. The hum of the building sounded like a machine breathing through its nose. The codes, in the margin, systems that make people like you believe you are the center. He was beginning to hear the machinery that had always been silent. At his desk, he opened the briefing packet and stared at the line that had made him famous in rooms like this. Smooth and indifferent. Left his coat unbuttoned. Disruption. The phrase was still there, trademarked under his own name, and thought of her phrase, not destruction, leaving the ink to dry crooked across the page. He stared at it until the word blurred, watching the city's reflection flicker on the glass. Then he reached for his pen and drew a single line through it. The third afternoon arrived under a pewter sky, the wind combing grit along the seams of the plaza until the stones seemed to rasp underfoot. Jacob came with 2 cups of mint tea and a set of sentences he had decided not to say. He kept them quiet as he crossed the open space. He closed the folder and leaned back. The warmth rose in thin white threads and fled into the cold. The night smelled faintly of mint and something new beginning to leak through the cracks. Then the shape beside the roots resolved into a small circle of people A woman with a hospital discharge paper pressed to her chest, the wind combing grit along the seams of the plaza until the stones seemed to rasp underfoot. He kept them quiet as he crossed the open space. The lids trembled with each gust. Listening. A man whose cough sounded older than he was. From a distance he saw the tree and thought she was alone. Her book without a cover lay open on her lap. Amara's coat looked the same as before, and somehow different now. He stopped at the edge of the group and waited, a woman sitting very straight and very still. Amara pointed to a line on the form and spoke in a voice that did not rise, the voice of someone who knows that clarity is louder than volume, less like a shield and more like a standard. A pencil moved along the margin in her right hand with a patience that made Jacob slow his step. The woman nodded with the concentration of a person reciting the steps to her own rescue. Amara did not add comfort. The plaza moved around them as if they were a rock in a bright river. Only when the page was folded and returned to the bag did Amara turn to Jacob. "You brought tea," she said. "This word means fee, and this word hides a penalty, and this box requires a date." He passed her one cup and placed the other at the far right corner of the bench, where a careful person might later find it. Steam rose and disappeared. "What is happening here?" he asked. After the circle loosened, and the man with the cough stretched his legs along the stone, as if testing whether a ritual could survive weather, she said, "Today it is a hospital form. Tomorrow it might be a benefits denial or a complaint letter. Sometimes it is a poem, because a poem can remind someone that they are still a person before they sign away another piece of themselves." He heard the lines settle in him. He wanted to say something generous, and understood that generosity would make the moment about him. He kept quiet. The wind lifted and dropped again, a hand learning to let go. He held out an envelope softened at the corners. "I brought this," he said, and felt heat rise in his neck. A former colleague remembered a seminar. "A student saw you here and sent this afterward. I thought you should have it." Amara took the letter as if it might be fragile in a way that paper cannot explain. She unfolded the page. The handwriting leaned toward the future, urgent and unafraid of crossing line. The words told the story of a classroom where a question had been cut in half to reveal its hidden shape. The words remembered a professor who had stayed after the clock, decided it was late, who had corrected a sentence until it pointed toward possibility, who had looked at a young woman and seen her in a way that gathered the scraps of her together. The letter said the writer was a teacher now in a public school in the Bronx, and used everything she had learned from a person the world had tried to erase. "If this finds you," it read, "know that you are not a rumor to me. You are the reason I stayed." Amara read it once and then again, slower. The plaza wrapped a thin quiet around the circle. She refolded the page with deliberate care and slid it into the book without a cover. Jacob saw how the book took the letter and seemed to grow a new spine around it. Amara read it once and then again. The book had become a body that could stand again. A teenage boy passing too close slowed and stared and smirked. The plaza wrapped a thin quiet around the circle. Jacob lifted from the bench before he knew he was moving. He felt Amara's fingers on his sleeve, the lightest pressure. The image struck him so cleanly that he did not speak, the way some boys do when they try on power and find it ugly, and wear it anyway. She said, "Do not waste your energy on ignorance." He sat. The touch left his arm, and left behind the shape of its guidance, a crease he could follow, a touch that was not affection but instruction. The pencil returned to the margin, only now he saw the pattern with a clarity that made the wind feel sharper. Small symbols and tidy abbreviations and sequences of letters and numbers threaded the edge of the page. They looked less like literary notes and more like the bones of a manual. He watched her reopen the book. He recognized the logic of cross-references. The letters haunted him. They looked less like literary notes and more like the bones of a manual, inside guidelines, inside the very framework he had sold to rooms full of polished shoes and precise laughter. He did not say the company name. He did not say anything. The recognition moved through him and took a chair and sat down and refused to leave. The man with the cough watched the steam waver above the second cup. Jacob brought the cup near his hands and waited. The hands reached. Jacob brought the cup near his hands and waited. Inside the very framework he had sold to rooms full of polished shoes and precise laughter. Inside the very framework he had sold to rooms full of polished shoes and precise laughter. The hands reached. He let it breathe again. He had begun to learn the difference between being useful and being centered. The screen lit his face with a square of cold. His assistant had stacked requests. He moved past them. A message from a journalist friend hovered with the gravity of a stone. He did not open it. He eventually brought it out because some messages are like weather, and pretending they are not there only makes you wet. Sent from a different path he did not remember authorizing. He tapped it, and the image expanded. A seminar badge. Paris. A stamped date tucked into the corner, as if pressed by a small metal hand. The lanyard bore the name of a framework he had quoted, as if it belonged to air. The half-visible face was hers even when the pixels did not want to admit it. He zoomed until the black of the letters was not just black, but the pressed substance of ink. A photo appeared next. He felt the name climb his throat and stop there, and become a silent vow. He locked the screen and let his hand fall. Amara did not ask. She did not need to. The plaza supplied a soundtrack of feet, and a bus sighing and a vendor counting bills as if they were prayer beads. Amara said people see a circle like this and decide it is laziness or vice. They do not see the layers. A woman here ran from cruelty. A man here lost everything to medical debt. Another carries a private war he never asked for. Some of us were brilliant in front of the wrong man at the exact right moment for him to bury us. The system spits you out and writes a new history where you never existed. He thought of payroll lines converted to charts, of names turned into headcount, of the polite language of restructuring, of the way an email can erase a person more cleanly than any storm, of names turned into headcount. She asked. The question was quiet and merciless. The system spits you out and writes a new history where you never existed. I do not know. Of the way an email can erase a person more cleanly than any storm. He tried to count, and could not even count the files that would hold the counting. I am not blaming you, she said. Blame makes people like you defensive, and therefore useless. You represent a world that works because this one is crushed every day. If you want to change that world, start by listening, then move to action. But remember that helping is not saving. Start by listening. He nodded, not as a gesture, but as a signature. The man with the cough breathed easier for a moment. The sleeping man failed to sleep again and resumed trying. The security guard across the way adjusted his cap and chose to look everywhere else. The circle held. Amara turned back to the book. The pencil scratched in a rhythm that reminded him of a metronome, the small device that keeps time without insisting on melody. He leaned a little and saw the prefix again along the margin. He knew it now the way one knows a childhood street by the curve of a curb. He thought of the polished decks where that prefix had been hidden under design. He thought of the hearing dates on an internal case he had not paid attention to because the subject felt messy and distant. Files and gaps. He knew it now the way one knows a childhood street by the curve of a curb, names promoted at the pace of convenience. Files and gaps. He thought of the hearing dates on an internal case he had not paid attention to because the subject felt messy and distant. She said, eyes still on the page. He made himself answer quickly, so that the truth could not become a performance. We use words to move money and then pretend the words were the meaning, he said. She nodded once, as if completing a proof on a board, and kept writing. The wind shifted, as if completing a proof on a board. The tea had cooled past comfort. He held the cup anyway. Discomfort belonged here, and he could learn from it. He said, I may have to leave for a meeting. I cannot delay. I will come back after. Then come back, she said, and there was no permission in it, and no denial, only the simple accountability of a clock that will tell the truth whether or not you ask it to. He stood. He left the second cup at the far right corner of the bench, the place where ritual lives. The steam lifted and failed, and the mint remained like a promise that refuses to lie. He looked at the book with the letter tucked inside it. He looked at the neat codes along the edge and understood that every margin holds a story the center wants to claim without reading. He turned toward the street. Halfway across the plaza, he stopped and looked back. The small circle had closed again. Amara said something about signatures and dates and copies, and it sounded to him like a poem made of instructions, a poem for survival, a poem that does not care whether anyone calls it beautiful, so long as it works. He walked on. The city took him as it always did, with ruthless efficiency. In the elevator, he saw a man in the polished doors who could pass for the person he had been before. He watched the reflection until it blurred and sharpened and blurred, as if the machine were unwilling to commit to a single version of him. When the doors opened, he stepped onto his floor and smelled the recycled competence, and heard the soft hum of an organism that prefers not to be disturbed. He set the phone face down and felt the photo continue to live inside it. Stamped and certain, he pulled the deck with the famous line from his drawer and looked at the word he had once carried like a medal. He drew a line through it. Then he drew another. The ink dried with a small shine that felt almost defiant. He stood by the window and saw the city double itself in the glass, one world outside and one inside. Between the two, he felt the pull of a third line, the one that led back to the plaza and the tree and the book with a new spine. The question about layoffs sat behind his ribs and refused to let him breathe easily. The codes in the margin tapped at the door of his memory with the patience of rain. He would go back. He would bring tea. He would listen until it hurt and act before it stopped hurting. He would follow the code where it led. He did not know what it would cost. He only knew that the cost had already begun to clear on his account, and that, for once, he was willing to see the numbers. He stayed after the building emptied itself of voices, after the doors sighed and the elevators grew patient and the hall lights lost their gloss. Night at the office smelled like warm dust, and the citrus, the cleaning crew, misted into corners as if a little brightness could disinfect consequence. Jacob stood at the window until his reflection and the city's reflection argued so evenly he could not tell which one belonged to him. He did not add light. He was training his eyes to work harder. The question Amara had placed in him kept its clean edges. How many people had he allowed to be turned into numbers and then into nothing? Not knowing had already been an answer. Answers should become work. He took his badge and walked the silent corridor past conference rooms dimmed into aquariums. In the elevator, he pressed the low button that did not carry a label. It asked for his clearance like an old friend who never smiles. The car sank. Air cooled. When the doors opened, the building spoke in a different register. The fluorescent wash had no vanity. Air cooled. The hum of server fans moved along the vents like slow breathing. A green trace of light on the edge of a monitor pulsed. as if the system kept its own pulse and would notice an irregularity. At the records window, a woman watched two screens at once, each washing her skin in a faded blue. Her face showed nothing about power, which is the skill of people who guard the gates for a living. At the records window, a woman watched two screens at once. At the records window, a woman watched two screens at once. Her face showed nothing about power. A green trace of light on the edge of a monitor pulsed as if the system kept its own pulse and would notice an irregularity. She clicked and scrolled. The tiny light on her monitor kept its patient heartbeat. He spoke the prefix he had seen threaded along the margins of Amara's book and added number strings that had sat all afternoon like coordinates beneath his ribs. The woman asked if he wanted to view in room or pull to staging. He heard the fans in the wall and imagined lungs. In room. She nodded toward a door that wanted both his badge and her key. The double motion had the choreography of shared guilt. Inside, the records room was a climate of its own. The air was a degree colder and smelled faintly of dry paper, and the sharp plastic of new folders. The ceiling vent whispered with a steadiness that made his own breath sound like an interruption. One terminal waited. One printer leaned a little out of square. Two chairs understood posture as a form of discipline. He typed the prefix again, and the directory unfurled its tidy spine. Lines of entries pretended to be neutral. Numbers never bow on their own. People bend them and call the posture natural. He opened the first file and found what he had already named: gaps. The report wanted to be definitive. It wore black bars like a smile with teeth missing. Where there should have been names was a long, dark. Where there should have been dates was a softened rain. Where there should have been mail was a title line with no body beneath it. Where there should have been names was a long, dark. The voice of a policy that trusts itself more than it trusts people. He opened the hearing transcript. It spread across the screen with tidy lines. Ellipses, placed where the sentences had been choked. A set of recommendations ran like a buried stream under the questions, surfacing in italics, just often enough to steer the course. A single signature block repeated with friendly insistence, a scholar's name paired with fine phrases sharpened into a blade. He had greeted that name at a dinner once, in a room smug enough to believe it was the center of all rooms. They had exchanged acknowledgments that turned into appointments for later acknowledgement. The voice of a policy that trusts itself more than it trusts people. He opened the attachments and called up the memo that set tone. The language was perfect. He had greeted that name at a dinner once. A single signature block repeated with friendly insistence. He clicked it open. A line of creation. It always is when someone wants a document to sound like the right thing while doing the wrong thing. A line of last modification. The time of birth did not match the story. According to the narrative, no decision had been made then. According to the machine, the document had already arranged the decision into shape. The lie wore a timestamp like jewelry. It gleamed. He printed the audit log and the cover page, and a set of redactions that told their own story. By refusing to speak, the printer coughed once and warmed the paper with a scent like sugared heat. He slid the stack into a craft envelope, a line of access. He wrote with his pen the case code, the date spelled out, and the words "received by me." He did not sign. There is a ritual for that. And rituals matter, especially when truth needs a path that cannot be denied later. He left the cold room and walked down the hall where the fans breathed and the monitor lights pulsed. He turned into the small legal operations office, where badges hung from hooks shaped like commas, as if the room specialized in pauses that could pivot a sentence. A man behind a plexiglass half-wall set aside his sandwich without rolling his eyes. Jacob slid the envelope forward and asked for a chain of custody stamp. "Internal for now," he said. He turned into the small legal operations office, where badges hung from hooks shaped like commas. The man pulled a form and asked 3 questions in a voice that knew exactly how far to carry. "Who? When? Where?" he said. He gave his name without title. He named the hour as words, and not as the soft lie of soon or the hard lie of late. He named the room rather than the company. The man stamped the envelope. The red rectangle sank into the paper with a crisp border. The man wrote his initials, small and legible. The impression looked irreversible. Jacob felt the scrape of it inside him. He had given his name to a document that could be used to prove he had crossed a line. He had also given the truth a handle. Back upstairs, the office felt like it was holding its breath. He did not sit at his desk. He picked up his coat and the sealed envelope. He switched off his light and left the glass to its twin city. He did not sit at his desk. The late air had learned another degree of cold. He did not call a car. He walked with the envelope inside his coat, the weight awkward against his ribs, the buttons resisting, because he had not trained himself to hide anything under them. He passed the tea shop. The mint smell slipped out the door and met him like a familiar he did not deserve. He did not go in. Ritual could wait. Work could not. The plaza received him with stone honesty. The tree stood where he had last seen it, because trees do not rearrange themselves for men. Amara sat where the roots lifted the ground a fraction. She looked up and then down again, reminding him without effort that his arrival changed nothing about the world, except whether he would behave in it. He sat with the respect that discomfort requires. She looked up and then down again. The tree stood where he had last seen it, because trees do not rearrange themselves for men. "I found things," he said, "because that is how men like him begin when they are afraid of saying, 'I was wrong.'" She did not answer. The plaza made sound brittle. He sat with the respect that discomfort requires. Work could not. She did not answer. The plaza made sound brittle. And we both know the kind of rooms that applaud a clean execution. He stopped himself from speaking her name, as if names were currency he could spend to purchase closeness. Amara watched the envelope as one watches weather. "I told you," she said. "They bury you alive." She did not dramatize the word alive. That made it land heavier. Outrage rose quick in him. Eager to be useful, he let it pass. Outrage is cheap for people who can go home and sleep. "Eager to be useful," he said, needing the answer and hating that he needed her to carry it to him. "Of course," she said, "but defense is played on fields they own." My name became mud, and the people who control the water decide whether mud can be washed off or simply renamed. She lifted her book a fraction, and the letter inside made a soft, leafing sound. Sometimes, the only proof you existed is written in the margins of someone else. Silence did not feel empty. It felt procedural, like a step in a process that must be done correctly, or the whole thing fails. He did not push the envelope toward her. He did not urge her to open it. Like a step in a process that must be done correctly, or the whole thing fails. You tried to defend yourself. "I want to reopen it," he said, because declaring intention out loud closes the door to easy retreat. "I want to follow the hours that do not make sense. I want to see who touched what and when. I want to pull a strip of redaction and hear the sound it makes." He heard how his verbs tried to make him heroic, and he kept talking until the shine came off them. "I can do this quietly until quiet becomes a lie." He did not ask her to approve. Amara studied him with the same neutral rigor she had given the woman with the hospital form. "Words will not fix this," she said. "You want to help. Be ready to break things open. You will lose friends. You will lose the neat version of yourself, maybe your job. Do you still want in? He thought of boardrooms with soft chairs and firm smiles. He thought of a dinner where he had shaken a hand and felt history pretend to be a favor. He thought of the letter tucked into her book. Do you still want in? He thought of boardrooms with soft chairs and firm smiles, how it matched the system he had initialed without reading its shadow. Yes, he said, and the words set like a stake in frost. She reached into her bag and drew out a small notebook rubbed smooth by years. She opened to a page written in miniature script, dense as a woven cloth. Initials, places reduced to coordinates of context, dates that refused to be vague. She traced her finger down a column and paused. Then again, she closed the book and put it away. She did not hand him anything. The refusal made a shape called trust. If you are serious, start where the nights do not belong and the promotions do, she said. Follow the hours that pretend they are not ours. He nodded. The wind turned and dragged a ghost of mint across the stone. He put his hand on the envelope and then lifted it away. He left the envelope on the bench between them, not an offering and not a transaction, only a point on a map they now both recognized. She did not touch it. In the blue morning light, the stamp looked very red. Silence is a mechanism, not a personality, she said, almost to the air. He felt the sentence lodge beside the other truths she had given him, like carefully labeled vials placed into a cold drawer. He left with his pockets full of hours. He would have to account for. The plaza stretched. A bus exhaled. A pigeon changed its mind in midair and corrected course. He walked back toward the building with his name on it and let the cold argue with his old appetite for warmth. Comfort had been his method for forgetting. He was done with that. In the elevator, the music managed to be almost nothing, which is the point of music built for elevators. He watched the numbers rise and thought about the kinds of counts that never display themselves on a panel. On his floor, he passed his own office and turned into a smaller room where the glass looked out on an alley instead of a view. He set his phone on the table. The message from the journalist waited. "Call me," it said. "Stories are moving." He did not call, not yet. He opened the internal directory instead and began tracing lines he had allowed to remain abstract. Who hired whom? Who reviewed whose work? Who wrote recommendations that sprouted into promotions at convenient moments? The names turned into threads, and the threads into a net. A net is a tool and a trap. He saw where it had been thrown. He saw who had been lifted clear. The path led toward a name he had already tasted like metal in his mouth. He did not write it. He would have to say it soon enough. When he finally returned to his office, the day had whitened. He did not write it. He pictured the bench, the envelope, the stamp that would not fade. He said quietly the sentence he had learned, the one that turned an absence into a system, the envelope. Then he sat and began to move the right words to the right doors, in the right order, not loudly, but with the insistence of a hand that has found the seam and will not stop until the panel lifts. Morning had not chosen its color. When the message pressed through the dark, Jacob watched the screen pulse on the nightstand and felt the day reach into the room. "Call me now," the journalist had written. He set the phone face down and let the heater breathe its steady rhythm. Comfort was a habit that used to help him forget. He did not forget. He dressed in authority. He no longer trusted and left without coffee. The street air carried the flat taste of metal and river. He walked to the tea shop because ritual was a choice against drift. The bell made its small, polite announcement. Mint and paper cups and heat gathered in the narrow room. He said the names he had learned. 2. Mint. No sugar. Nia held his gaze a beat longer. A silent check on intention. He sealed the lids himself and stepped back into the cold. The plaza wore the pale bleach of undecided light. The tree held its line in the stone. Amara sat with the book without a cover open on her knee. Nearby, two men and a woman from the circle spoke softly about a clinic visit that had produced no answers. Jacob carried the cups like a promise and stopped within her sight line. "You kept the ritual," she said, her voice as level as a record noted in the margin. He placed a cup in her hand and set the other on the right corner of the bench, where patterns could grow into meaning. He saw the suited man a breath later. He stood where the tree shade thin, posture easy, the kind of easy trained by private carpet and doors that open at the correct distance. He did not belong to the plaza. He belonged to a schedule. His face arranged courtesy without warmth. He looked at Amara, and then let his eyes slide off her, with the practiced contempt of someone who has learned to make people into scenery. "It would be best if you stepped away from here for a few days," he said to her, as if he were answering a question no one had asked. The air around the fountain tightened. Silence arrived with the speed of a door closing. "Best for whom?" Amara asked. The gentleness in the question cut deeper than volume ever could. "For everyone," the man said. "For everyone. There is a tension you do not want. Things can be made smooth if there is no provocation." Jacob stepped between them with no flourish and no raised voice. He let stillness be an instrument. "Mr. Whitman," the man said, checking a box with his smile. "This does not have to be complicated." Jacob did not answer with a speech. He set his hand on the envelope under his coat, a weight against his ribs, a quiet declaration that he was willing to place paper between himself and a lie. Then he said a single word that did not need more: "Leave." The smile did not break. "Messages have been prepared within your organization," the man said, as if reading a weather report. "Leadership is concerned about rumor damaging value," the man said. His eyes touched Amara and moved on with a reflex that had been trained and rewarded. "A stipend has been arranged through a partner," he added to her. "A week away might be why. Discretion will be appreciated. A week away might be why." Amara held the tea, steam soft against her face. "I am not a rumor," she said, giving the moment a clean entry on the record. The man declined to understand. He inclined his head, a tiny bow to his own efficiency, and walked off at the pace of a calendar that had already made room for the next task. He inclined his head. The man declined to understand. The cougher coughed once, and covered his mouth with the embarrassment of a body that will not obey. Amara watched Jacob instead of the retreating back. She nodded, as if confirming a proof on a board. She said, "Knowing is not the same as surviving it," he said. The two sentences met without romance. They agreed to tell the truth. His phone pulsed again. He did not answer. Not yet. He sat beside her and drank until the mint cooled. The ritual did not soothe him. It steadied him. When she finished, she rested the cup on the bench and opened her book. When she finished, codes threading through literature as if both belonged in the same body. He said softly that the audit log contradicted the memo. Codes threading through literature as if both belonged in the same body. His phone pulsed again. She said the bow had been scheduled. He told her he would not wait to be summoned. He would walk into the cold rooms with his name on the glass and ask for what the system hid while the system still thought he belonged to it. He would bring the envelope and insist on stamps and signatures, a ritual completing itself into a preparation for absence. He would be back by afternoon with something that deserved space. "Do not promise speed," she said. "Promise procedere." He promised procedere. She held his eyes long enough to make the promise heavier. Names sat on paper like weights. She said. She placed the condition like a weight limit on a bridge. He left the second cup on the right corner of the bench, a ritual completing itself into a preparation for absence. and walked to the building where the receptionist sold brightness by the hour. He kept his face still and rode the elevator to compliance, past the slogan that committees will defend long after it ceases to mean anything. The woman inside recognized him, then recognized a version of him she had not met. He asked for engagement letters tied to academic inquiries, for recent access logs on archival hearings, for the list of edit permissions on the tone-setting memo, and the times when those permissions had been used while the company slept. She hesitated one breath, then unlocked the reports with a key that said she understood this request would create a record no one could pretend to misplace. She slid the printouts across the desk. Names sat on paper like weights. One name lifted like a burr under skin. One name lifted like a burr under skin. A down-hour edit that did not change a public page, but altered the language of a version meant to be quoted by rooms with no microphones. Evidence of a hand moving in the dark. He thanked her and asked his assistant for a closed room and a hold on his calendar. One name lifted like a burr under skin. He gave her no expression to help. He sat in the small room with no view and laid the evidence in a straight line. Audit log. Cover page. Redactions that told their own story by refusing speech. Compliance lists. He wrote names and hours and verbs on a yellow pad. Because handwriting refuses to flatter, he scratched out what the documents did not support. He circled a single name and felt iron rise on his tongue. The phone lit the room and washed his face in a square of cold AG. Emergency session. Morning. Ethics and institutional risk. The subject line walked toward him like a decision already made. The light on the glass put a trap across his reflection. He let the feeling hold. He needed to know what the cage felt like from the inside if he intended to open it. He called the journalist and asked for a day. He spoke without angles. A piece without the right paper would be dismissed as gossip. He said, "Give me 1 day to move the levers inside the house I helped build." The journalist said 1 day and be careful, and did not try to turn the call into theater. He carried the envelope back to the records desk and asked for duplication with a receipt. The new clerk fed the pages into the machine. Copies slid out with the warm smell of plastic. He signed. The second stack was a mirror that refused to lie. He put it into a separate folder. A backup was a form of respect for truth. By the time he returned to the plaza, the hour had put metal into the air. The circle had thinned. The bench waited without expectation. Amara sat where the roots lifted the stone and watched the far curb as if measuring distance to a leaving car. Jacob set the envelope between them and left his hand off it. "There will be a meeting in the morning," he said. "They will call it a conversation. It will not be." She nodded. "A man in a suit told you to disappear," he said. "A man in a suit tells me to disappear every year," she said. He let the sentence sit without comfort, and felt respect expand in the space it made. He told her he would walk in without a tie, and without the second shadow of an assistant. He would stand and speak the name that had been promoted while her life was dismantled. He would put down stamps and times and clean treachery. He told her he would walk in without a tie and without the second shadow of an assistant. He would stand and speak the name that had been promoted while her life was dismantled. She repeated the condition. "Bring the paper and your own name and nothing else." A ribbon of steam from a distant kettle crossed the wind and vanished. He placed the last cup on the right corner of the bench and left it there. A small ceremony, acknowledging he might not be the person who returned to claim it. Across the street, a figure paused in the shadow of a tower, with the stillness of someone waiting for a signal. Jacob saw him and felt fear arise. Ordinary and useful, the kind that keeps a hand steady and the eyes clear. He named it and let it stay awake. He walked away with the cold on his face and the stamp heat of paper near his ribs. He understood what the day had taken and what the next would ask. Comfort had been his method for forgetting. He was done being warmed into forgetting. He would carry the paper and his own name and nothing else. Tomorrow the room would try to make him smaller. He would not make their work easy. The building woke in degrees, a slow brightening that taught glass how to pretend it was sky. Jacob stood at his office credenza and looked at the cooling cup he had left there, the mint line of steam now a memory. He lifted the other cup and felt its heat like a small anchor in his palm. He did not take a tie. He did not take a smile. He took the envelope and the heat and stepped into the corridor. The hall greeted him with expensive quiet. Carpets hushed the footfalls of careful people. Light ran along the edges of framed slogans and refused to pick a side. A man from corporate affairs joined him for a few steps, as if proximity could be mistaken for courage, then drifted away with a soft goodbye that never learned to use his name. Two assistants at separate doors glanced up, registered his face, and looked down, as if the floor had asked a question only they could answer. Isolation settled on him without drama. It felt exact, like a well-cut coat he had never chosen to wear. He passed the glass wall, where a committee phrase about integrity floated in etched letters. He did not read it. He kept the envelope against his ribs and the cup near his right hand, a small heat line he could touch without gripping. The farther he walked, the colder the air became, as if the building understood the ritual of approach and wanted him to rehearse it through his skin. Outside the boardroom, 3 directors stood near the door, each alone inside a glow of phone light. Their greetings were polished, their eyes curious in the careful way of people who preferred to see around consequences. Jacob offered the fraction of a nod that used to mean consent and now meant distance. The door opened with the quiet that money buys for important rooms. The space was all glass and chrome and the faint clean of filtered air. Leather chairs held their poses around a long table that loved itself. At the far end sat Styles, hands folded, mouth arranged to own the future. A camera lens in the corner looked like a dark seed set into the wall. Hands folded, the sound of a machine pretending to breathe. Jacob set the cup near his place and the envelope on the table. The hum in the ceiling found a lower register. He rested his fingertips on the paper and felt the raised edge of the red stamp catch the soft lines of his thumb. He had the odd thought that if he closed his eyes he could read the stamp with his skin. "It is time," said the director in the middle seat, a man who liked to pronounce clocks. "We are here for ethics and institutional risk." Styles inclined his head, gracious as a knife. He did not take the chair. He said, "There are rumors. They must be contained." He looked toward Jacob with the courtesy of a gate you are welcome to admire, as long as you do not try to use it. "Before we discuss boundaries," Jacob said, "we will put the record on the table. We will put the record on the table." He set the compliance list beside it. "It is time." He laid down the chain of custody form last. He fanned the redacted pages, so their black bars declared themselves without pretending to speak. "Names." He laid down the chain of custody form last. "Where? When?" According to the machine, the red rectangle bright against the sober paper. "When?" According to the system, according to the logs, according to the machine, he said. He did not look at Styles when he said "in this room." He kept his eyes on the paper, as if reading weather. He did not look at Styles when he said "in this room." The room considered its weapons. He did not look at Styles when he said "in this room." Someone exhaled through teeth. Styles lifted a pen and set it down as if demonstrating poise. "This is not ethics," he said. "This is theater. Sit down and stop confusing your feelings with our obligations." Jacob did not sit. He let silence do its mechanical work for a heartbeat longer than comfort. My obligation is to the record, he said. He spoke Amara's name once, precisely, not as a performance but as a fact, and the sound made the air a degree colder. He heard the building adjust its breath. The center director leaned toward seriousness like a man toward a lectern. You are asserting that a senior executive falsified a timeline for advantage, he said. I am asking you to read the log and match it to the promotion memo, Jacob said. Stiles smiled as if at a child. You have no proof of intent, he said. Jacob placed his fingertip on the exact line where the hour did not belong. Jacob placed his fingertip on the exact line where the hour did not belong. He said, time tells us what intent refuses to admit. He felt the camera watch him the way a sensor watches heat. He said, time tells us what intent refuses to admit. Let the system watch. Let the stamp show red. Jacob placed his fingertip on the exact line where the hour did not belong. Ask the director to the right, he said. I have proof of time, Jacob said. A copy is secured. He imagined a file labeled with his surname and today's date. He did not say plaza. He did not say cup on the right corner of a bench. Stiles leaned back. The picture of reason learning how to scold. A neutral name for a history the company would wish to write. Accuse, he said, or resign. The sentence tried to sound like mercy and arrived as a trap. Jacob lifted the envelope an inch and set it down again. A small movement that turned paper into a weight the room could not ignore. I am not here to accuse. A small movement that turned paper into a weight the room could not ignore. I will not lead a company that calls truth a risk. I am not here to accuse. The sentence tried to sound like mercy and arrived as a trap. He watched the word record settle across the table like a sheet of clear ice. He could almost hear the surface harden. The middle director began to say process and coughed his way back to silence. Stiles's smile frayed at one corner. Jacob felt calm, arrive without victory in it. It felt like alignment, like a bone set clean after a long ache. He placed his palm flat on the stamp, as if pressing the truth into the glass, and spoke in the same plain register he had used under the tree. I will not lead a company that calls truth a risk. He did not raise his voice. He did not ask for a vote, and spoke in the same plain register he had used under the tree, as if pressing the truth into the glass, like a bone set clean after a long ache. Someone said his name in the tone that used to recall obedience, as if pressing the truth into the glass. Someone said his name in the tone that used to recall obedience, as if pressing the truth into the glass. The hall received him with its expensive quiet. The hinge made its small metal breath, and spoke in the same plain register he had used under the tree. A security camera blinked and remembered him. In the elevator he faced the panel, and saw his reflection behave like a well-trained stranger. The man from corporate affairs saw him, and retreated into a doorway with a gesture that could not decide whether it was a wave or a shield. The car moved. The bell marked floors with small, exact sounds. He let fear stay awake and useful. He did not speak to it. He did not ask it to leave. He let it keep his hands steady. The lobby air was colder than the corridor air, as if the building's lungs were closer to the street here. The guard at the desk adjusted his tie and looked anywhere else. A courtesy people offer when they cannot offer help. Jacob crossed the marble without echo. The doors let him out into morning that had finally chosen a color, a hard pale that made glass honest. He did not turn toward the car line. He turned toward the crosswalk that led to the plaza. The tea carried its thin ribbon of steam beside the envelope's quiet heat. He could feel the stamp through the paper again, the raised edge, like a map a finger learns by walking. He held the envelope against his ribs and the cup near his right hand. He would set the day back on the bench where it had begun to learn its terms. He would place paper between the living and the lie. He would bring the cup to the right corner, because ritual is a bridge, and because bridges matter when rooms collapse. Behind him, the building kept breathing, a patient machine that believed it would outlast any single person. Ahead of him, the gnarled roots lifted the stone, and the bench waited without expectation. He quickened his step, not as a flight but as a choice. He had left the quiet that pretends to be safety. He had chosen the cold that tells the truth. He carried the paper and his own name and nothing else. He would not be warmed into forgetting again. The elevator let him down into a lobby that smelled of stone and the faint lemon from last night. He walked to the small table near the window and set the envelope where anyone could see it and pretend not to. Legal operations arrived with a rolling case and a stack of forms. He initialed each box in the orderly silence of endings and handed over a badge that had opened every polite door he used to need. The guard lifted a pair of scissors and cut the lanyard clean. He watched the blades close and felt the sound in his teeth. The plastic fell into a bin with other small finished lives. Messages kept arriving like weather. A director wanted a call. Human resources promised a neutral line. A calendar withdrew him from rooms, as if absence could be scheduled. He did not answer. He pressed his thumb across the red stamp on the chain of custody and let its raised edge catch the skin. It was the only heat he trusted inside the building. Upstairs. One last time. He opened his office and stood in the doorway long enough for his assistant to see him. She did not ask a question. He crossed to the credenza and touched the frame of a certificate and the corner of a photo that had never needed a caption. He took the framed things off the credenza and leaned them against the wall, not out of drama, but because leaving them upright felt like a lie. He wiped a faint ring of mint from the surface where a cup had often cooled. He powered down the computer and watched the screen go to that particular black that always looks final even though it never is. He closed the door without letting it click. Outside the revolving glass, the city exhaled. Air moved in a colder sheet across his face. He carried the envelope under his coat and the small mint cup in his hand, the steam ribbon thinner now, stubborn. He crossed with the light and felt the pavement report back underfoot. The plaza resumed itself. Pigeons took the measure of him and decided he was not a threat. The tree kept its line. Amara sat where the roots lifted stone, the book without a cover open on her knee, the pencil angled along the margin like a quiet directive. He set the envelope down between them and the cup at the right corner of the bench. "I resigned," he said. No preface, no apology. A sentence made of weight. She did not answer at once. She let the words take their own chair between them. Then she looked at him the way an architect looks at a wall, to test whether it can carry something new. "You drop the floor you stand on," she said. He nodded. The acknowledgement reached the old rooms he had just left and closed a door he had not known was still open. He felt the loss arrive in the shape of habit, not the salary, not the corner view, the small, unspoken routines that had taught his body how to idle. The elevator chime, the double tap of a badge, the quiet way doors used to admire him. "The elevator chime," she said. He did not argue. He watched a bus sigh at the curb and thought of the dinners, the panels, the invitations that had called themselves friendship. "Knowing is not the same as surviving it," he said. She made a small mark in the book and closed it. A hinge where the record would bend. His phone gathered insistence. He flipped it and laid it face down. A single line from the journalist waited in the glass of his mind. "We are ready when you are." "Not yet," he said. "Paper first." She inclined her head as if he had passed the first question on an exam that mattered. "Procedure is the language they pretend to respect," she said. "Use their language and make it tell the truth." He opened the envelope and slid the audit log a finger's width into light, just enough for the red stamp to anchor the corner. The machine gave the lie a birthday, he said. Machines can be honest when asked correctly. He slid the paper back. Trust could be made of restraint as much as offering. You will write the letter, she said. He had already written it in his head. 1 page, 4 lines. Effective today. A name without adjectives beneath a sentence that cost. Clean is kinder. She added, not for them, for you. He let a breath move through him. I am trying not to miss anything yet, he said. It was almost true. He told her what would happen next in the plain order of stamps and doors. Counsel first, not press. Documents to a firm that does not scare easily. Names tied to receipts, not rumors. A record built out of hours and signatures and the honesty of machines. No adjectives, no theater. She listened and then set the terms that would keep the plan from slipping into comfort. Bring me receipts with names, she said. No ghosts. We will build something so procedure cannot pretend not to see us. The word we felt like the first beam set across a span. He reached into his briefcase and took out the small notebook he had kept empty because it had felt wrong to let it hold anything until he understood what it was for. He opened to the first page and wrote her name, not as a subject, not as a case, as origin. He left space beneath it the way a builder leaves room for the swell of weather and time. She watched the page and gave a short nod that meant permission to work, not to worship. He thought of the office he had leaned away from, of the frames resting against a wall and the soft black of a screen, and the scissors closing on a lanyard. He let the grief be small and sharp, and exactly what it was. You will have people watching you now, she said. He looked across the street and saw a figure pause in a shadow line, the same stillness as before, a posture that turned patience into labor. He named the fear without making it larger, and let it take its chair a little closer. Awake is better than brave, he said, almost to himself. She heard it and did not disagree. He called the journalist and gave one line. I have resigned, he said. Documents exist. Wait for paper and names. Understood. Came back, careful and clean. He sent the letter to the board. Spare as a receipt. Attached, please find my resignation effective today. He offered no adjectives and no gratitude. He sent the letter to the board. Spare as a receipt. He asked for no favor. She said thank you in a voice that belonged to both of them, and neither. He thanked her for the work she had already done and the work she would do for people who remained. He returned to the bench, and he ended the call before kindness made more work for regret. She had not moved far. He sat and placed the notebook between them, open to the name that was origin, the line that waited for others. She turned a little toward him. Now, she said, now bring me a list. People crushed like me, not a speech. A list. We will build doors, and we will learn their hinges by hand, so no one can pretend they do not open. He felt something in his chest align with the sentence, like a bone set right after a long ache. He spoke the promise in the same plain register he had used under fluorescent air and in rooms with glass. I will be back with lists and seals, and a door that can open from both sides. He did not sell it to himself as destiny. He named it as work. He slid the envelope back under his coat and felt the stamp against his ribs like a map of finger reads without looking. The light shifted a degree toward noon. The plaza sounded like a page turning. He stood. She did not stand. She lifted the pencil and made a short mark at the margin, a quiet signal that the record had advanced by one line. He touched the cup with the back of his fingers, a small heat line he could feel without needing to grip. He turned toward the street. Behind him, the building breathed like a patient machine that expected to outlast anyone foolish enough to argue with it. He touched the cup with the back of his fingers. He did not want the easy warmth of the old routine. He wanted the cold that makes hands precise. He walked toward counsel and stamps and long tables where paper cannot be charmed into lying. He carried the paper and his own name and nothing else. He carried the word "we" forward, new and exact, a beam he could feel across his shoulders, the kind of weight that teaches a different posture, the kind a body learns to bear, because it finally makes sense. Morning pressed against the glass of the law office like a held breath. Jacob arrived with the envelope under his coat and the mint cup cooling in his hand. The lobby smelled of winter wool and old paper. A receptionist measured him with the calm of someone who sees storms come in suits, and said that counsel would see him now. The latch gave a discreet click, the kind of sound that suggests truth has an appointment. The conference room was plain on purpose. Pale table, pale walls, a clock that counted minutes without insisting on them. A paralegal rolled in a scanner, the color of compliance, and parked it where the light was honest. Another set a small camera on a tripod aimed at the table edge. An evidence bag waited with its red mouth open. A notary placed a ledger on the table, the way a nurse sets down a tray, steady and ready. Counsel entered without theater. She had the face of someone who allows no narrative until paper agrees. She greeted him. Counsel entered without theater, and looked at the envelope the way a doctor looks at a lab result that might redirect the day. Jacob set the envelope on the table and slid the chain of custody form free so the red stamp faced the lens. He did not show his hands more than the record required. He let the objects speak. On record, counsel said, reading the hour aloud so the camera could marry sound to second hand. Please state your name and your relationship to the materials. Jacob spoke his name and the company in the plain sentence that dried his mouth more than any boardroom speech. I was present when these documents were discussed. I obtained them through internal access. I delivered them into chain of custody last night. He opened the envelope and laid the audit log where the camera could read its watermark. He kept the envelope itself close, the paper's edge firm against his ribs like a vow. Counsel nodded, and the paralegal lifted the evidence bag. Jacob slipped a small drive into the red mouth. Plastic closed with a dry whisper. The seal strip pressed down. The paralegal initialed across the seam with compact letters. Plastic closed with a dry whisper. The camera watched, and the notary read the seal number aloud. Each letter and each number like an oath, carefully spoken. The stamp came down with a clean thud that found the dull center of the table and stayed there. Counsel set a small recorder on the wood and clicked it on. "Walk us through," she said. "Audit low first." Jacob did not perform outrage. He moved in the order that had carried him through the dark hallways of his week. The hour that did not belong. Edit permissions used while the building slept. A recommendation with a tidy edge that slid down a page and cut a life in half. According to the system, he said. According to the machine, he said. The words were crates, not fireworks, and they carried weight accordingly. Counsel lifted the log so the watermark found the light. The camera blinked as if learning a new name for an old face. "We will issue preservation demands today," she said. "We will make mirrors and lock them in separate places." She clicked the recorder off and back on to mark a clean boundary. Provide a brief statement without adjectives. Jacob gave 4 sentences, exact as coordinates, built from according to and the record shows. He signed. The notary squared the signature with the press of a stamp. Another sure thud. Another hinge closed. They played a portion of the hearing audio on a small speaker. Another sure thud. Another hinge closed. They played a portion of the hearing audio on a small speaker. They let 10 heartbeats pass. No one spoke when it ended. Then counsel slid the transcript into a folder with a tab the color of decision. She said, "But let the paper do most of the work." He nodded. He did not reach for the sealed bag again. Seeing it exist was enough. Outside, the air had sharpened. He turned toward the plaza, but his phone insisted. The journalist asked where and when. No. Decoration. Jacob sent an address 1 block from the tree, a small cafe with a window that made the street the show. He chose a corner table and set the cup down. Steam thin. Learn to be memory. The journalist arrived with a tablet and an expression that knew what deadlines can do, and how a clean line can be a mercy. Document existe. Jacob said. The journalist did not type because his hands had already been told to wait for paper. Counsel first. Jacob added, "We do not post until we can link to the record." The journalist said. He turned the screen. A headline sat there. Not sensational, just exact. The way a pantry jar needs a correct label. Jacob read the sentence that mentioned his resignation and did not flinch. He read the sentence that named Amara and felt a small protective lift under his ribs. The draft called the plaza a public square and left it at that. Good, he said. Do not make it a landmark. Let it remain a place where people sit. They agreed that time would be measured by a file stamp, not adrenaline. They agreed to show the audit log with its watermark visible, the seal receipt with its stamp clear. The journalist asked for one, quote, Jacob let silence do some work, before he gave a sentence that kept its spine straight. According to the record, the story told about her is not true. The journalist nodded, as if handed a clean tool, and closed the tablet without flourish. He left without a handshake. He knew when performance begins, and he refused it. The plaza was performing noon. When Jacob returned, the watcher leaned along the shadow lip across the street, giving his patience a job. Jacob let the eye find him, and then looked past it to the tree. Because acknowledgement cannot look like permission. Amara sat where the roots lifted the stone, the book without a cover open, the pencil aligned to the margin. He placed the copy of the documents on the bench beside the cup, not to hand over, but to allow the ritual of seeing what will try to name you from far away. She lifted one page, tilted it until the watermark admitted itself, and set it down again. Machines can be honest, she said, and he heard both the humor and the hard truth. He told her about the mirrors, and the preservation demand, and the complaint. He told her about the journalist and the single sentence. She did not ask to read the piece. Is there decoration? She said. No, he said. She gave the smallest nod. Approval, final and quiet. The alert reached them as a vibration, then a chorus from other pockets and wrists across the city. The story was up. The lead was spare. The attachments sat under it like anchors. Comments tried adjectives and found that the links did not bend. A teenager on a borrowed bike stopped and read like a person looking at a map. A nurse with a badge paused, read, and walked on with a new pace. The watcher took a picture anyway and sent it somewhere Jacob would never see. The plaza absorbed it and continued. A man in a navy coat approached with measured deference, counsel from a non-profit that helps faculty when procedure malfunctions. He did not press a surname into the air. Would she meet somewhere with Walls? Amara did not stand. Walls have not been a friend lately. Would she meet somewhere with Walls? I will meet in a library, or a school cafeteria, or under this tree. He accepted the boundary and left a card that did not shine. He stepped away as if leaving a room and did not look back. Jacob read the plain letters on the card and did not make a plan aloud. Plans had made trouble. Work would move them forward. They walked together to a public desk, where records are stamped into existing. The clerk looked at them with the weariness of someone who watches small injustices turn into case numbers. Jacob slid a duplicate complaint across the counter and turned the receipt side up so the red mark could do its job. The clerk read the time out and the long code, one precise symbol at a time. The stamp fell with its firm thud. The sound traveled into Jacob's teeth and settled there like proof. Back at the bench, a volunteer from the literacy circle arrived with handouts in 3 languages. Each sheet a short paragraph on what to do when a hearing becomes a closed story. Amara split the stack with the speed of a teacher and handed Jacob a bundle, paper to palm, line to eye. They moved the pages across to the hands that arrived. The ritual felt like a song with one verse, and one verse was enough. Across the street, a light clicked into a small red dot and held a blink in a window. Jacob refused to turn into omen. He thought of the audio flattened into evidence, of the file sitting in 3 places, and of the headline that used no heat and the letter that used no praise. The price sat in him not as a drama but as a receipt. The thud of the stamp remained inside his teeth. When the sun slipped toward later, he said that council would want to meet again, that the non-profit would call, that the board would draft a statement, and try to hide inside respect. Bring what moves people, Amara said, not what soothes them. He nodded. He opened the small notebook he had kept empty until he knew what it was for. He wrote her name at the top, not as case, as origin. Under it he left space, the way a builder leaves room for weather. Then wrote a second name, and a third, and stopped before the page grew greedy. We will need rooms, he said. Tables, doors that open from both sides. Stamps, she said, and someone who reads numbers aloud as if they were vows. He picked up the empty cup and set it on the bin lid and watched the last of the steam give up. The bench kept the book without a cover, and the folder copy they would not carry away. The plaza sounded like a chapter turning. The building with his old name breathed across the street, opening and closing its doors, as if practicing apology. He did not look. He and Amara turned their feet toward the library with long tables and carpets that do not judge, where stamps are still struck by hand and where a quiet can be used to build. He carried documents machines had blessed with accidental honesty. She carried the pencil that turns margins into records. Between them moved a word that had decided who it belonged to. We. A small word that becomes a door when it refuses to be larger than itself. The air was clean and cold. It made their hands precise. It made the next step simple enough to attempt. They gathered as evening learned its warm setting. Chairs took their quiet places, and faces settled into attention that felt earned, not demanded. The programs were folded once and sat on laps like simple maps. Jacob kept his seat in the second row, hands open, the envelope under his coat a steady shape against his rib. The lectern waited. The kettle in the green room murmured toward heat, and the room held a hush that sounded like the moment before a vote. Amara stood at the back, a breath longer, then walked forward with the posture of someone entering a room she built and intends to keep. She did not carry pages. She had a clock in her voice. There was a time, she said, when I was known only by what I had lost. She named the months as units of work, classes held, letters read to offices that pretend not to hear, calls made and logged without adjectives. She let the list stay plain until the plainness revealed its weight. Then she pointed her chin toward Jacob, not summoning him as protagonist, but naming him as tool. He rose and climbed the 2 steps without owning them. He stood where the light was honest, set a slip of paper on the lectern, and did the labor he had promised to do in public. He read the seal number aloud, each letter and each digit as if each were a vow. He read the hour that did not belong, and let it hang there until the room understood why it mattered. He read the line that matched that hour to the promotion letter. He did not explain, he did not accuse, he allowed the numbers to do their unglamorous, necessary work. The skeptical woman near the aisle wrote something down and then underlined it twice, as if telling herself that denial would not be efficient tonight. A man with a law badge stopped tapping his foot. A student lowered her phone and listened with her mouth slightly open, the way people listen when math finally makes a picture. In the third row, the nonprofit counsel fixed his eyes on the watermark and did not move. In the back, a custodian paused with a bag of recycling and stayed for the next minute. And then for the next after that. Jacob stepped down and returned to the second row. The second row felt right. Alert without appetite, he watched the person who had taught him to listen turn a microphone into a tool instead of a stage. Amara shifted the room from proof to pulse. She named a nurse back in a clinic. He watched the person who had taught him to listen turn a microphone into a tool instead of a stage. He watched the person who had taught him to listen turn a microphone into a tool instead of a stage. A lab technician whose hands remembered the bench and then taught a younger pair how to love correctness. She did not tell rescue stories. She described repairs, each with the calm of a checklist completed under bright light. The program had a blank near the bottom, a square of white that invited handwriting. Amara held it up. "This is for those who need a class or a letter or a door," she said. "Write the name you carry and the name the world uses when it tries to erase you. We will call you by the first and teach the second to behave." Paper rustled like a soft rain. Pens found their speed. The box filled like a proof. Slip over, slip. A weight the table began to admit with a small complaint. A boy on the aisle asked his mother how to spell a name that belonged to a grandfather, and then printed the letters large and careful. A woman who had never raised her hand in a room like this before wrote quickly and folded twice, and held the fold a heartbeat longer than needed, then let it go. Between items, the kettle clicked done, and volunteers carried cups down the side aisles with the hush of practice. Jacob felt the price he had paid make its shape again, not as regret, but as receipt. He looked down at his hands and saw that they were steady. He looked at the word on the window and saw it behave the way a promise behaves when it is being kept without witnesses. Questions came without spectacle. What happens when letters are ignored? Amara described escalation as a path, not a threat. What if a file is missing? Jacob explained mirrors and seals and how machines can be honest when asked correctly. A dean in the back stood and asked whether the room was prepared to be sued. Counsel lifted a hand and said the record would prefer real names and real claims. The room exhaled, and the questioner sat with an expression that looked like a person setting down a brick they had carried too long. A donor rose with the posture of a speech and then found there was no place to put it. "I have funds," she said, "but I need to know how." Amara pointed to the intake form and asked her to read it aloud to herself, and then fill the small box, asking how the money should feel when it is used. The woman nodded once, struck by the dignity of being told exactly how to help, and wrote a number without ceremony. Jacob wrote a receipt that said the day and the amount and the purpose and signed it where everyone could see. They built a public chain of custody on stage, a small drive in a clear bag, a seal number read into the microphone, initials signed across seam. The stamp fell with its clean thud, the sound traveling through wood and into teeth, a little jolt that said the world had shifted by a measurable amount. People applauded, then stopped, as if realizing applause was the wrong verb and steadiness was the right one. The skeptical woman near the aisle stood and spoke without the armor of performance. "I teach policy," she said, "and I am embarrassed by how much I thought I knew." She did not ask for absolution. She offered hours, Amara accepted time as if accepting lumber. A man who had lost a job to a rumor that refused to die said his name and the other name and got in line to place both into the box. A young reporter asked for a quote and received one sentence free of decoration. According to the record, the story told about her was not true. The reporter wrote it down like a tool and not like a prize. The program said there would be a quiet at the middle, and so there was. The room practiced silence without the weight of worry. People breathed, the lights hummed without being noticed. Somewhere outside, a bus sighed and moved on. Jacob studied the lectern and saw the seal receipt taped to the back where his hand could find it without drama. He thought of the boardroom that had loved itself, and of the hallway that taught him isolation, and felt none of it tug. The second row had given him back his hands, and their use. For the final block, Amara did what she does best. She made the future specific, rooms to be opened, hours to be staffed, Tuesdays for letters, Thursdays for language exchange, a second kettle, a grant written without adjectives, a policy brief built from receipts instead of rhetoric. She asked for what the room could actually deliver and left out what it could not. She said the word, "we" without music, and it rang anyway. She closed without flourish. She set the program down and lifted a slip from the box and read a first name and promised a call. Then another, then a third. "Mercy," she said, and "gracious," and "thank you," each in the voice of a person who knows gratitude is not a performance, but a ledger entry. The standing ovation began from behind and rolled forward. Not tidal, not showy. A rise of bodies that looked like people deciding to keep something standing. Jacob did not go to the stage when the clapping wanted to pull him there. He stayed where he was, second row, and watched the light decide to soften across the faces of people who had shared an hour with proof. He felt tired in a way that meant the day had been used. He touched the envelope once, the stamp edge clear through fabric, and let his hand fall. The room emptied the way good rooms do, with small circles forming and dissolving, with names exchanged plainly, with plans agreed to in ordinary voices. Volunteers packed the box, as one packs a tool, not a relic. The kettle exhaled its last and clicked itself quiet. Council stacked copies in a neat pile and placed them into a case that had learned the weight by now. The skeptical woman near the aisle slipped the program into a bag with an academic spine and left with a posture that suggested she had homework. They did not go to a bar or a stage door. They turned their feet toward the library with long tables and carpets that do not judge, where stamps are still struck by hand and where quiet can be used to build. They walked without a column behind them, without spotlights, carrying paper and pencils and the small weight of a box full of names. Outside, the night made its indifferent promise to hold whatever they could lift. On the sidewalk, Jacob looked at the word on the window and saw it keep behaving like a promise under low light. He thought of the work that had been done and the work that would not finish. He thought of the price he had paid and how it had resolved into the shape of a tool he could now carry without apology. He and Amara did not talk. They did not need to rehearse victory or narrate resolve. He thought of the work that had been done and the work that would not finish, neither heavy nor light, correctly sized for the distance ahead. The library door opened into warmth that did not flatter. Tables waited, stamps waited. The next slips would need sorting. The first letters of the morning would need sealing. The night did not ask them to celebrate. It asked them to continue. That was the point of a public execution of lies, to leave the truth standing and give it a table. They set the box down and opened the notebook and drew lines for what comes next. The last image of the day belonged not to applause, but to hands readying paper under clean light, the beginning posture of a future that refuses to be loud when it can be exact. The city eased into its cooler light and did not brag about it. Morning brushed the windows with a cleaner hand, and the glass across the street stopped pretending to be a mirror and simply held the sky. Jacob rose before the first bus sighed at the curb. He set a cup to warm and wrote the day on a small card with verbs that knew their jobs. He folded the card once and slid it into his pocket where his hand could find it without looking. He had learned to prefer the kind of order that asked for no applause. Revive opened the way good rooms do, by naming its needs instead of its glory. Lights, kettle, keys, ink, kettle. They did not waste the silence. It belonged to the day's repairs. The room had settled into itself. The safe sat low and patient in the corner, its paint smudged by honest hands. The whiteboard took ink without complaint and offered it back without drama. Intake baskets faced the same direction. Pens rested like small tools lined for inspection. The window letters did the quiet labor of a promise. People came beneath that word as if it were normal, which was the point. A nurse arrived with a schedule that finally used her name and not the damage done to it. A teacher set a map on the table and traced the days that would hold her classroom again. A translator left with a contract that did not punish fluency with insult. A lab worker practiced a simple sentence for a future interview and found that it fit in his mouth. Jacob wrote dates and seal numbers and initials into the ledger with the steadiness of a person who had learned to love correct lines. When someone needed to hear a time read aloud, he read it. The air changed by a small degree each time, like a window unlatched. When the light was kind, Amara took an hour under the gnarled tree and taught the public how to read the shape of letters that try to hide meaning. Jacob chose the second row the plaza offered, a flat of stone that let him see her hands and the faces following them. He did not pretend to be finished learning. Listening was a discipline, and it asked to be practiced at the edge of comfort. The public story remained where it needed to be, on the wall of the world, without chasing attention. The board at his old company shaped statements and reshaped them, and left verbs standing with less shelter. The old university published a letter that admitted error without admitting appetite. Counsel held the page to the window and watched the watermark behave. The letter returned to the room as a tool. Jacob logged it, stamped the hour, filed it where hands could find it when needed. Amara folded a copy into her book without a cover. It did not look like forgiveness. It looked like record. The watching men from shadows found other buildings. That was fine. The work ran better without their attention. On a certain afternoon, the man from the non-profit returned with a colleague whose face carried a narrow scar like a thoughtful line. They brought small help that mattered more than announcement: stipends for train fare, a fund for exam fees, a training on how to serve without the bad habit of saving. They asked nothing that would thin the meaning of we. The colleague oiled a stubborn lock without being asked, and wrote his name in the maintenance log with ordinary pride. The room thanked him the way a workshop thanks a tool that does not slip. Season turned again with the soft competence of clocks. The first flirt of snow came to the air and left it cleaner. Revive opened at the same hour it always did. Jacob set water to boil and placed cups where hands could reach them without permission. The box from the public night sat near the back, with programs inside for any room that might need to learn what this one had learned. He checked batteries, checked seals, checked nothing twice, unless fear tried to dress itself as prudence. He had learned to tell them apart. They planned the next quarter at the long table, hours and classes, a quiet policy night built out of fact, a clinic for record requests, a phone tree made to behave. They wrote the list, left space for breath, and wrote again. No glow, no slogans, just weight that would have to be lifted. The list felt like a floor. Near dusk, a group of students asked to film hands and paper. Amara allowed 1 hour on the condition that nothing would be staged and no person would be turned into a lesson. The camera learned to be modest. It watched a pen cross a line, a stamp fall clean, a slip move from tray to palm. The students left with a quiet that did not need to be fed to a feed. Jacob approved. Maybe the world could teach itself new manners after all. They closed as night gathered. The street held what they carried without asking for it to mean more than it did. Across the way, the old glass doors exhaled heat into the dark with the innocence of machines. The plaza kept its spare geometry. The tree memorized winter. The room had settled into itself, an honest dot in the field. Jacob let it be an honest dot. The old habit of treating coincidence like omen had no more work here. They turned their feet toward the library with the long tables and the loyal radiator. The clerk looked up and then down as if to say that their faces belonged to the furniture now. They took their usual table. Amara opened her book and slid out the folded letter that had admitted something and not enough. The clerk looked up and then down as if to say that their faces belonged to the furniture now. He traced the names with one finger, not as prayer, as rehearsal. The silence between them had purpose and mercy both. Work filled it instead of worry. He thought of the public room and the warm tide of people standing, without trying to look like a tide. He thought of the second row and the way it had given his hands back. He thought of the boy spelling his grandfather and the mother watching the paper as if it might become a door. He wanted the kind of motion that lives in those moments, the kind a person can walk beside. Amara wrote a phrase at the top of a fresh page and waited until it behaved. She wrote the same phrase in another language beneath it. She was not performing, she was aligning. The pencil made its clean sound. Jacob watched and did not narrate. He had learned the relief of awe that does not need volume. A phone hummed in his coat like a small patient bird. He let it rest. He did not owe an audience to the day. He owed envelopes their addresses and 2 letters, their clean verbs. He owed the tree a cup at first light, because ritual is ballast, and ballast keeps a boat steady enough to cross. He breathed and felt the old theater leave his chest, like a guest who had finally read the right room. The hour moved, the way good hours do, unannounced and complete. People passed through the aisles without turning those aisles into attention. The radiator knocked once and settled into its purpose. Outside, stone and glass took on the kind of blue that makes edges honest. No drama entered. Justice does not always arrive with trumpets. Sometimes it sits at a table and asks for paper. They left when the clerk nodded, the small nod. That means you have done right by the room. Air met them with a sharper face. He carried the folder and the notebook and nothing that glittered. She carried the book without a cover, and a pencil tucked where her hand could find it without looking. They did not speak for a block. They did not need to. The day had used all its words in their correct places. At the corner by the deli, a woman stepped out with a paper cup and a hand like an offering. She held the cup toward Amara, the way an old story holds out a token to mark belonging. The day had used all its words in their correct places. She held the cup toward Amara, the way an old story holds out a token to mark belonging. At the corner by the deli, a woman stepped out with a paper cup and a hand like an offering. He took it and felt the small heat line claim his palm. Community had made a place for him at its quiet table. He smiled from lower in his face than he used to. It fit better there. They reached the block with the door that had learned to open from both sides. They climbed the stairs the room now expected them to climb. He turned the key and the room lifted its head and offered its breath. He set the folder down. The kettle began its familiar song. He wrote the date in the book. Amara took off her coat and crossed to the whiteboard and wrote a line that would begin in the morning. He watched the letters settle into the shape of instruction. He opened the small box of slips and read a few first names. The box sounded like a quiet choir when he set the lid back. And then the last turn of the night, the one that used to be an afterthought, and now was the point. He stacked envelopes. He drafted 2 letters with crisp verbs and short sentences. He checked a seal receipt and left it in the tray where eyes could see it tomorrow. He did not feel diminished by the smallness of these tasks. He felt restored by their truth. He had paid for this kind of quiet with the noise he had left behind, and the value kept rising. Before they locked up, he looked once at the notebook. The list did not look like the past. It looked like a road that had decided to exist, names weighted with space around them, the way a builder leaves room for weather. On the whiteboard, the phrase Amara had written held its posture like a bell before the first ring. "We will read the hours aloud," it said, without flourish. "We will teach the second name to behave." He felt the future arrive without costume and take a seat at the table. They turned out the lights. The radiator remembered its duty. The city blinked and then let its windows rest. He held the door as she passed. The hallway offered the ordinary echo of a room closing correctly. Outside, the air was honest and the street was a simple path. He carried paper and a name and nothing else. She carried a pencil and a record and the steadiness of a teacher walking home. They did not narrate what they had built. They did not bargain with the dark for meaning. They knew the difference between ending and beginning now. And the better kind of story prefers to be both when the light is right. Somewhere a camera slept. Somewhere a board rehearsed contrition. Somewhere a person who had believed they were erased would hear their name pronounced correctly and answer to it again. Inside the quiet room, ink would wait on the desk for the morning's hand. The stamp would be ready to fall. It said, without flourish, inside the quiet room, ink would wait on the desk for the morning's hand. We had learned to be a door. They had learned to hold it open without ceremony. He locked the gate. She tucked the pencil back where it lived. They had learned to hold it open without ceremony. The work did not ask them to be loud. It asked them to be exact. He knew how to be that now. The final image belonged not to triumph, but to tools held with care and used with patience, justice signs in cold ink. At its heart, this story is about the quiet courage it takes to face injustice without losing your humanity. It reminds us that real strength is rarely loud. It's found in the quiet acts of integrity that no one claps for. Jacob's journey mirrors the path many of us walk. When life forces us to choose between comfort and conscience, he learns, as we all must, that silence may feel safe, but it often keeps the wrong people powerful. Speaking up, even softly, is how truth begins to breathe. Amara's steady grace shows that dignity doesn't depend on title or wealth. It comes from knowing your worth and standing by it, even when the world looks away. In a society that often mistakes noise for action, this story invites us to slow down and measure justice by consistency, not spectacle. The seal numbers would be read in the correct order. One small correction, one honest conversation at a time. As the saying goes, true gold fears no fire, and neither does a life lived in truth. Whether you're confronting workplace politics, family dynamics, or your own self-doubt, remember that doing what's right rarely looks heroic in the moment, but over time, it changes everything. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your reflections in the comments. Have you ever had to stand up quietly against something wrong? Share your thoughts. Leave a like to help others find this message, and subscribe for more stories that blend realism, emotion, and meaning. May your days ahead be steady, your choices deliberate, and your peace unshaken. In the end, justice may sign in cold ink, but it always writes in warm hearts.